In this set of videos, we are going to be discussing how to approach the research question on media users and how to understand the role of media users in creating the social impact that media technologies have. And we're going to be doing that in relation to feminist media research. And the reason we're going to be doing that is I believe that feminist media research provides a particularly clear way of conceiving the relationship between how we use media and the social moment that we're living within in terms of the social policies and history that affect the choices we make. And with regard to that, I want to make one point about the question of media users, which is particularly important. And it's this, that when we talk about media users in the context of this class, we are thinking about media use as a historical choice. Now, what do I mean by that? Well, in this class, we are not interested in individuals as such. We are not interested in explanations of media choice that explain media choice in terms of individual preferences and those sorts of things, the sort of idiosyncratic tastes that we all have. What we're interested in is how the choices that we make in relation to how we use media are shaped by external forces of society and culture. And indeed how the way that we use media reflects a method of coming to terms with where we are in society. Using media very often means managing social tensions and social forces that are not of our own choosing. In some ways it means making the best of a bad deal, I suppose. But in any case, what we're interested in is researching how media use reflects the historical context of the user. And feminist media research provides an excellent way of explaining how you can make that connection. So that's what we're going to be looking at in this set of videos. So on to the presentation itself, and I'm just going to be explaining a little bit more about what the concept of the media user is about in terms of ideas and methods. And I suppose kind of one of the things that we're dealing with is that quite often when we think about media users, we're dealing with the idea that when young people, or anybody for that matter, uses media, the use of media technologies reflects an attempt to construct an identity which is collective. And what I mean by that is we're going to be looking at how people make sense, in this case, of their gendered identities and the things that they have to manage as a function of their gendered identities in relation to media. And in that, we're going to be talking about a fundamental kind of effect that media have. And one of the significant effects that media technologies have is they have an influence over how we make sense of identities within social spaces. One of the really interesting things about the study of media technologies is how media technologies change the meaning of places that we live in, and particularly the way that we make sense of the distinction between the public and the private. So one of the things that we're going to be looking at here is how media technologies in relation to gender have actually turned private spaces, particularly places like teenage girls' bedrooms, into political spaces. So one of the interesting things about feminist media research is it explains how young people become involved in the external political world when they're using media in the privacy of their own home. And so in a sense, we can talk about the way that the teenage bedroom becomes a public space, a space where people are still kind of wrestling with the identities and the tensions that they face when they go outside of the home. To make sense of this idea that media technologies create identities and gives meaning to spaces, we're going to be talking about feminist media studies, and particularly the work of Angela McRobbie, who really pioneered a way of thinking about the connection between social policy and media use and identity. We're going to be moving on and talking about a real important trick in media research is to learn to recognize how old studies, things that were written decades ago, still have ideas that we can use today, even if they're written about different times and different places and different technologies. And one of the things that I find quite compelling is the way that Angela McRobbie's ideas can still be used to make sense of more contemporary case studies. And we're going to be talking about an ethnographic study of how young women use mobile phones. And what this introduces us to is the idea that you can learn a lot about the politics of media use by looking at how young people use media in ordinary life and in places that we don't normally think about as being particularly useful. And what we end up with is this idea that private use, that looking at how people use media in private, actually tells us a lot about the external, formally regulated identities that culture gives us. So somehow we have to struggle with the issue of identity. We have to struggle with the idea of what does it mean to be a man or what does it mean to be a woman. In societies where we have a range of choices about how we live these things, but those choices are not unlimited, and there are prices to pay for making some choices over others. And then I suppose what we're left with is the idea that feminist media research is really worth knowing about, because it's really revolutionized the way that we understand the impact of media technologies as things that interact with identities and spaces to give particular meanings to cultural history. So that's the thing that we want to be able to grasp at the end of this session. And so again, what you need to be able to do at the end of this is to answer the question, how do media users shape the impact of media technologies and content? And in that, the one thing you need to avoid above everything else is the idea that media use is simply a matter of individual choice. Now, I'm not saying that individual choice is not significant, is not an issue, but it is not relevant to this topic. It is not relevant to this assignment. This assignment asks you to reflect on how media use reflects a coming to terms with history. And what that means is you need to find ways of connecting media use to social policy and culture. You need to be able to connect media use to the creation of identity in particular spaces. So why is it that particular spaces lend themselves to the building of certain kinds of identities? And you need to appreciate what feminist media research contributes to understanding media technologies. And what that means is being able to understand how media use can be regarded as a historical form, as a cultural practice that reflects cultural politics. So that's what you need to be able to do in this particular essay.